Sometimes the music was simply mood music to help me get back to the time period of my book, but often the songs told me something about my character, and I was able to identify with particular songs from the points of view from the points of views of different characters. My wild party girl character Aneth was moved by the thrashing beats of Chuck Berry, while her reserved sister Easter felt more in tune to gospel music or Patsy Cline. In my novel Eli the Good, a strong, independent woman of the early 70s completely identifies with the notes of sorrow caught in the voice of Nina Simone. While working on the novel, which has a 10-year-old boy as the narrator, a friend of mine sat down and played the Beatles song Mother Nature's Son for a group of us one night, and in that moment I knew I had the theme song for my book. I knew that that was the favorite song of the young narrator. That song defined him. So I worked that song into the novel, and it changed everything for the book. It completely solidified the character. This last example leads me to emphasize the most important part of this lecture, to my mind. The thing is that as a writer, you must constantly be on the lookout. You have to open yourself up to the world so that it will give you things to use in your work. This is my constant mantra in a class like this, the art of observation. And this is another aspect of what I've defined as spiritual research, for lack of a better way of phrasing it. The rule I live by is this: use everything. Use all of your senses, all of your emotions, all of your life you've lived, every joy and sorrow. Become naked on the page. Reveal your deepest secrets. No one will ever know because no one really knows what is you and what is fiction. So when I titled this lecture Surrender, I was not only saying that you should surrender to your characters and allow them to steer you in the right direction, I was also saying that you should surrender to your work at hand, whether it be a story, novel, play, essay, whatever. Once you surrender to the piece of writing, you have given yourself up to this piece of art you're trying to create, and that will allow you, or force you, to constantly be a writer, to constantly be on the lookout for something else that will allow you to know more about your character. So ultimately, I'm saying that a huge part of writing is about surrendering to yourself. I have become such a proponent of this that when I was about halfway through Eli the Good, which is set in 1976, I actually wore a pair of Chuck Taylor tennis shoes almost the entire time. I had worn them as a 5-year-old in 1976, and so I knew it would be helpful for my 10-year-old narrator to wear them too, and it would help if I remembered what it felt like to wear those shoes. They really changed the whole writing of the book. Suddenly, I could feel the ground underneath my feet the way my character felt it. I could feel the way that they became heavy when I walked through a creek with them, the way my character did. I knew how hard it was to take those off at the front door when they were muddy, the way I had to as a child and the way Eli has to as a child. Now, these are just a few things that work for me. Music, getting into the character as much as I can in whatever way I can. They may not work for everyone, but I think this example is a good example of doing everything you can for your book. When I wore the shoes, I was getting into the character of Eli. Wearing them got me closer to him, and if that sounds crazy, so be it, because I got a novel out of it. You have to use everything that you have, everything in your arsenal, and you have to be passionate about what you're writing. You have to treat it very seriously. You have to treat it like an art. And you have to put time aside to write. You have to devote yourself to it. It's not just something you do as a hobby. It's not just something you do occasionally. If you keep saying to yourself, I'll write a book when I have time, you'll never write a book because we never have enough extra time to do that. You have to make the time. If you're not completely passionate, the characters won't come to you. They won't open themselves up to you, and they certainly won't bloom on the page. As I said, you won't hear a lot of writers talking about spiritual research or method writing, but most all the best writers I know do it. Ron Rash, who's written books like Serena and One Foot in Eden, says that his characters often become a part of his everyday life. While writing a character in One Foot in Eden, who had a very particular way of syntax, he often found himself speaking like her, forming his sentences in her tongue. He once went into his classroom and began talking like her while teaching. He turned around from the blackboard and found his students looking at him as if he'd lost his mind. But he knew in that moment that he completely had the character under his skin and therefore on the page. Kay Gibbons, who wrote books like Ellen Foster, also experiences the act of taking on her character traits. And this is number 8 on your handout. When I'm writing from Ellen Foster's point of view, I find myself more direct in my daily, real-life encounters with others, and less willing to cope with tedium, more honest in my reactions, less willing to shape what I'm saying for others' approval, much the way she is. So being in her voice so often has been helpful and extremely instructive. People who think writing is more or less escapism are in for a terrible surprise, because writing worth anything is a route inward to the deepest reality. And though it isn't very pretty much of the time, there's still nothing like creating an alternate reality and being able to live inside for the duration of a novel. I mentioned Lee Smith earlier. Now, she goes the distance with this kind of research and writing. When she starts thinking about a novel, she makes a list in a notebook detailing everything she knows or discovers along the way about her characters. She knows what they eat for breakfast, who they voted for in the last election, what they did in their past that they're most ashamed of. While writing a short story from the point of view of a beautician, Smith went down to the local beauty shop, applied for a job, and worked there as a shampoo girl, her word, not mine, until she felt she could accurately capture the emotions and workload of her character. Novelist and short story writer Doris Betts has a similar approach. Now, this is one of my favorite writing quotes. It really changed the way that I thought about writing. Know your characters so intimately that you know what happens to them every day of their lives. Then, think of a day when something completely different and new happens for them. And that's what you write about, the day of something different. The other incredibly important thing about this notion of method writing or spiritual research is that you have to look within to write a good piece of writing. I love making up stories. That's what I've been doing all of my life. But you have to constantly remind yourself that as a writer, you're not any smarter than anyone else. But you have to know that you are more attuned to the world around you in every situation than other people are. And if you're not, then you have to make yourself be. You are the person who's always looking at things in a deeper, more analytical way. When my cousin and I go outside and look at the moon, we both can appreciate the beauty of the moon. But since I am weird, as all writers should proudly be, I see more than just the beauty of the moon. I see a new way to describe the moon. I pay attention to the mysteries and emotions and memories that the moon conjures up in me. I would write those 3 words down if I were you. Mystery, emotion, memory. Those are 3 really, really important things for writers. Writers should always be listening. By this, I don't just mean eavesdropping or even being aware. Of course, we know that writers have to do those things. But writers have to be listening for the things that no one else hears, watching for the things that no one else notices. A few years ago, I was on a boat going out to Ellis Island with a writer friend of mine. We noticed a woman sitting in front of us who had a beautiful braid that fell to the small of her back. Unbeknownst to either of us, we were both mesmerized by the intricacy of the braid, the sharp little point at the end, the different colors in the woman's hair, all those things. And as we sat there silently going across the water, not telling each other this, both of us were also thinking of the stories that were contained within that braid. We were both acutely aware of the significance of going to a place like Ellis Island and the history there, and also the history caught within that braid. We thought about who had taught the woman to braid, or maybe her sister, in a moment of revisiting their lost childhoods, had plaited it for her. We thought of the care that had gone into that action. the practicality and beauty involved in shaping hair in such a fashion. We were doing spiritual research, storing up the emotions that braid conjured up in us for future reference, for future use in a piece of writing. We were both completely obsessed with the braid. We still talk about it sometimes. So you can see that writers are weird, and weird is good, especially when you take this knowledge you find out every day of your life, whether it be concrete or spiritual knowledge, and apply it to your writing. Both of us have separately since then put that braid into pieces of our writing. Tolstoy once said, number 10 on your handout, one ought only to write when one leaves a piece of one's own flesh in the ink pot each time one dips one's pen. Similarly, Doctorow says, number 11, every time you compose a book, your composition of yourself is at stake.